generations. Again, welcome to our webinar on effective climate advocacy. We are very pleased to offer Spanish interpretation for this webinar. I just wanted to offer a brief instructions on how to select Spanish as your language. At the bottom of your Zoom screen, you should see a globe with the word interpretation underneath it. Click on that, and from there, you can choose your language, English or Spanish. And in the same box, if you're choosing Spanish, or actually either language, you can choose mute original audio. And so then if you are listening in Spanish, you'll be able to hear just the Spanish. I am pleased to welcome our presenters, Lori Brown, who is Director of the Connecticut League for Conservation Voters, and Leticia Colon de Mejias, who is the Director and Founder of Efficiency for All, as well as Mally Cox-Chapman with Benefactory Philanthropic Advisors. Thank you all for being with us tonight. You will hear two presentations. After each one, we will have a short question and answer session. Please put your questions in the chat or the Q&A. And then you will hear about some eco-justice actions that you can take back to your religious communities or your community in general. And hopefully we should also have a little more time for another short Q&A. So we've got a lot of information for you tonight on the state legislative session that's happening right now. I would like to introduce Sabina Shelby from the Universalist Church of West Hartford.
Thank you. We are very happy to be here from the Universalist Church of West Hartford, sponsoring this event along with the Interreligious Eco-Justice Network. Our congregation has spent the last year learning how to green our lives and our homes, and we learned a lot, but we also feel that it's time to move into the public sphere, and that's why we're here today. And one promise we have for you as we work together with Terry is that we will always have actions that are associated with our webinars. And we look forward to many more to come. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sabina. And now I would like to introduce Lori Brown. Lori Brown has been the Executive Director of the Connecticut League of Conservation Voters since 2000. The League is a statewide nonprofit organization that protects Connecticut's environment by making these issues a priority for our elected leaders and holds lawmakers accountable by publishing an annual environmental scorecard. Lori has organized multiple public education and grassroots lobbying campaigns and has worked on political campaigns to elect pro-environment candidates across New York and Connecticut. She has served on Governor Lamont's transition team as a member of the Environment Committee, assembled to provide policy recommendations to the incoming Lamont-Bicewicz administration. She is registered to lobby at the Connecticut General Assembly, working with all of Connecticut's statewide environmental advocacy groups to push for important legislation that shapes our state's policies on air, water, land, wildlife, energy, and climate change. Prior to Connecticut League of Conservation Voters, Lori helped to establish and directed the Sierra Club's New York chapter office. Her work in the private, public, and nonprofit sectors also included media relations for the NYC School Construction Authority and communications for the New York League of Conservation Voters. Thank you so much for being with us, Lori.
Thank you, Terry. And thanks to IREJN for organizing this wonderful workshop. Terry, you are an amazing leader and an important voice in the environmental community in Connecticut. So I just want to thank you. We've known each other for a number of years and had great opportunity to work together. So I'm very happy to be here today. And I'm seeing more and more people joining on, and I'm just delighted that there are so many people concerned about climate justice and anxious to get involved. Please know that your contributions are meaningful. Your participation matters. It makes a difference. Oftentimes it's not obvious when you're trying to figure out what to do and how to do it. And am I making an impact? Trust me, you're part of a bigger movement and everybody has a part. And the goal is to expand the movement. And I'm sure Letitia would agree to that. The idea that we've got to bring more people in, more voices to the table, and make sure that we are together moving in the same direction. And that's how we get stuff done. So tonight, I'm really going to take just about a half an hour or so to give you some big picture lay of the land first. You know, what's going on with climate action in our state? How is our state addressing climate action overall? Because that will, you know, surely many of you have sort of been hearing about issues or read the news or know that there are actions and things going on here and there. But I want to talk a little bit about sort of tying it all together, what the framework is that our state is operating under to be able to address climate issues. Then I want to hit a couple of the key issues that are legislatively on the table right now that impact climate that we can all do something with at this moment. I mean, there's a lot of things on the table, but then after that, it'll be a little bit more less structured in terms of going through some tips and guidance and ways that you can get engaged, how to testify, how to engage with your lawmakers, where to find the information, sort of the longer term, sort of developing the relationships with the lawmakers and getting familiar with the issues. And then obviously how that translates to what we're going to be asking you to do in terms of getting involved to help us move forward with some key climate legislation this session. So, you know, I'm sure there's plenty of variety of active citizens out there listening right now that are already working on some of these issues. So, you know, I really look forward to hearing some of your questions and your insights. I mean, we all have different experiences and different things to share. So I'm really looking forward to that portion of it. I'll try to get there sooner rather than later. And again, this discussion will be focused on state policy, state legislative policy, and our state level policy making. But there will be plenty of time for the Q&A, as Terry said, afterwards, and to try to answer a range of questions. There won't be slides, but I will be providing Terry with the various documents, samples, resources, everything that I'm going to reference in my presentation has, you know, I'll make sure Terry gets that and she can forward those things out to you to make use of them in your actions. Okay. So I'm sure you're all fully aware of the climate emergency and the crisis we're facing and the impacts of climate change. You know, I want to start again, like I said, with the big picture about how our state is addressing climate change and the key areas of focus. So in 2008, our state passed into law the Global Warming Solutions Act. It set mandatory targets to reduce our polluting greenhouse gas emissions by certain percentages, by certain dates. So a certain amount of reductions of pollution by 2020, 2030, 2050, right? So a long-term plan. And this all for the purpose of mitigating climate change. However, the latest reports on Connecticut's polluting emissions, let's go the gas, you know, inventory, shows that we are clearly not on track to reach these targets, especially in the area of transportation where emissions are actually going up. So one of the problems we have is that our state has put into law a mandate under the Global Warming Solutions Act to reach these targets, but it's tied the hands of our agencies and our Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, which does not have the legislative authority to enforce the Global Warming Solutions Act and to implement, you know, many new big programs that are needed. They cannot move forward without legislative approval. So basically, lawmakers have mandated we reach our emissions, we hit these goals, but has not been passing the laws that we need to get us there. And instead, they continue to kick the can down the road. So a perfect example of this, just so you understand how this works, a perfect example of this was the problem that we had in passing the Transportation Climate Initiative. You may have heard about that. TCI was a regional program to reduce emissions from the transportation sector It was years in the making. A number of states had signed on to an MOU. It was, we thought it would go forward. It was the most important climate legislation we've seen since passage of the 2008 Global Warming Solutions Act. And it failed because of political reasons and nothing else. It had to have the approval of the legislature. So it got tied up with politics and a whole lot of other things, dragged it out, and it was abandoned. I just want to say it's not lost altogether. It will be back. It's just not coming back this session. But that was a perfect example of where the legislature was not taking action and not permitting our agencies or administration to move forward without their approval. So again, there's much that can be done to strengthen the Global Warming Solutions Act. There are calls to revisit the act, to set interim targets, to do all kinds of things to help give broader authority to state agencies to enforce climate actions. And like I said, advocates are proposing legislation. It's a heavy lift. It's a big one. That legislation has not been raised yet, but we're keeping an eye on that. So that's part of the framework that our state is operating under. As for the administration, the government, the Lamont administration, in the absence of significant progress on climate by lawmakers, the governor has been using his executive powers to issue 2 executive orders specifically on climate. So the first executive order was in 2020, and that required our state to achieve a 100% zero carbon supply to our regional electric grid. So we share a regional electric grid with all of our New England neighbors, and we all produce energy and we feed into the grid. And this was a mandate by our governor's administration that 100% of that energy for the supply of Connecticut's needs would be zero carbon by 2040. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit too, because that's one of the priorities we're trying to pass into statute this year. The executive order also established the Governor's Council on Climate Change. So you'll often hear references to the GC3, and the GC3 and the broad range of recommendations that were developed to address climate change. So the GC3 was basically a huge task force of people with all different backgrounds, and they worked in subcommittees for more than a year to come up with solutions in the areas of different sectors of transportation, infrastructure, clean energy, nature-based solutions such as forest and soils and agriculture, mitigation of the worst impacts, and evaluating the science. But it also had a very strong set of recommendations around environmental justice to highlight the needs of communities that were most impacted or are being most impacted by climate change, and to try to involve more people in the policy decisions. So the GC3 report of recommendations is one of the most important documents that's helping to identify specific legislative proposals. I'll be sure to include that as a link. People should be aware of that and have that and take a look at it. You'll get that link afterwards. Governor Lamont issued the second executive order on climate last December, and this was a direct response to the failure of the lawmakers to pass TCI and strong climate action. So the order lays out a long list of actions that the administration can take without legislative approval, such as electrifying state vehicles. Some of the items in the executive order came from the GC3 recommendations. Some of the items came out of the TCI program, but it's a long list, and it's going to be also guiding some of the efforts of the administration this year. So lastly, on the advocate side of things, the advocates work on climate action, sort of overall. It's important to know that Connecticut is the land of coalitions. There are dozens of environmental groups that are regularly working on state legislation year after year at the Capitol. And many join forces around specific bills and meet regularly to share information, strategize, coordinate their lobbying campaigns. A lot of, meet now by Zoom, of course, regularly. Some of the larger environmental groups that are regularly up at the Capitol, you may have heard of, Audubon, Nature Conservancy, Sierra Club, Save the Sound, Rivers Alliance, Transport Hartford, Connecticut Forest and Parks Association, Acadia, Clean Water Action, many, many, many more. I'm sure I hope I'm not offending anyone leaving them out. I'm just saying that there's a core of advocates that are consistently working on state policy year after year after year. A lot of the issues are the same issues, but you get different pieces moving forward every year. So it's kind of important to know that when a piece of legislation gets put forward, you may not have the context or understand what it is and how it relates to the larger issue of solar power or clean energy or emission standards or our grid. But you get more familiar as you go, and you know that things that are not climate related, you always see back things like pesticides and invasives and open space. And there's little by little increments. The big wins are rare. But you have to know that you're keeping the ball moving little by little all the time. And you have to sort of celebrate the small wins when they come, because you are together moving the ball forward on all of these important areas. And keeping climate in front of lawmakers is essential, because again, thinking long-term is not the strong suit of most of the legislators. They're thinking in 2-year increments in terms of their terms. And it's hard for them to think beyond 10 years out, 20 years out, when they're thinking about costs and what their constituents want right away. So we work at the League of Conservation Voters, we work with all of the advocates that are doing anything that has to do with environmental work at the state legislative level. And we try to help unify and strengthen our collective voice at the Capitol. This year, a coalition of more than 20 environmental and clean energy advocates, including the League and others, put together a list of priorities that are sort of quote unquote ready to go. It's a list that is not way somebody oughta, shoulda, woulda, coulda. It is really a set of very specific proposals, in specific areas dealing with climate that that could be taken up at any time by lawmakers. It's primarily, this particular coalition is primarily focused on energy. There are a lot of things dealing with climate that are not specifically energy, that are related to mitigation or forest sequestration of carbon in forests, of agricultural soils and research. There's a lot going on, but this particular set of issues focused on sort of the energy pieces and some of the transportation pieces, since that's such a huge generator of, and buildings and other areas that are such huge generators of our polluting climate greenhouse gas emissions. So the agenda has 5 major areas of focus with specific legislative proposals under each. And that includes sort of sector-wide emissions targets, transportation emission reductions, buildings, clean energy, and environmental justice and equity. And those are the pieces that were separated out. Most of the proposals at the legislature right now are on that list. And I'll run through a few of those priorities in a moment. But actually, lastly, and most importantly, the legislature, you should know, is just full of lawmakers who are strong champions for the environment, and they're equally frustrated at the lack of progress. So we count on them to introduce our bills and to fight behind the scenes with their colleagues and leaders to push our issues. And they count on us collectively, the environmental leaders out here in the community, as the experts to provide the expertise and to provide the public support that will help them push the bills forward. So this year, for the first time, legislators came together to form a new climate caucus. It's the same kind of thing that you get like a coastal caucus or a women's caucus or an animal caucus. It's the climate caucus to help unify legislators concerned about climate change to unify their support around certain climate bills. And this is a really important development, especially right now under COVID, because the communications between advocates and lawmakers since COVID shut the legislature down in March of 2020, the communications have really been disrupted in a big way. And it's been fragmented communications, inconsistent, and not just between us and lawmakers, but between the advocates and the groups themselves. We all sort of have groups and issues and coalitions that we're working in. And but when everything's sort of transferred out of the legislature, we don't have that cross-pollination between all of the issues that we can all help each other sort of give intel on what lawmakers are doing and who's talking to who and who supports what. And that's what we miss the most. So the idea that now we've got a climate caucus and we have groups of lawmakers and groups of advocates that meet. This is a way we think we've sort of cracked the nut of not having large groups of lawmakers and advocates speaking together at the same time. So we're looking forward to working more with that. The groups, the advocates met last Friday and ran through a couple of key priorities, and those are the ones that I think would be of most interest probably to you and what you could make the most difference on moving forward this session. So here we are, we're at the front of a 12-week legislative session of the Connecticut General Assembly, the shortest possible session ever, starting from February 9th to May 4th. So 12 weeks, that's not a lot of time. It's early in the process and the bills are still being formed and negotiated. Priorities will change throughout the session as bills are formed, are amended, are heard in public hearings, are changed before they're voted out, before they bounce around the legislature, and hopefully wind up in either the House or Senate chambers to be passed on to the following chamber. So, like I said, it's early, and like the bills are still being negotiated, and you'll hear more about that. But three major issues that I think would be very much helped by some advocacy are, number one, the 100% zero electric grid by 2040. What that is, as I mentioned earlier, the governor's executive order, we've been trying since last year to get the lawmakers to codify that into state law. And that's important because a number of reasons. It sends a clear signal to stakeholders both inside and outside of Connecticut that we are serious about climate change and reaching our goals. And it will be the basis, both legal and political, for us to be fighting for urgent actions with certain dates and deadlines. And there's nothing like a deadline to get people to activate around getting something done. And so that's really important. The other thing is that because it's an executive order now, by the stroke of a pen, it can disappear tomorrow. So if we can codify this into state law, that means it will continue from one, changing administration to the next. So that right now, actually, I was just right before this, I was testifying in the Energy and Technology Committee, specifically on that piece of legislation. And as you'll hear a little bit more about where you can find information and who's testifying and how they testify and where you can do it, at least 10 different advocate groups included that in their testimony, saying that they very much wanted to see it pass and why, and all the different reasons why it should happen. So that was really a unified push that did not exist last session. And I think that bill has good potential. There's of course always going to be opposition to anything good we're trying to move forward. But primarily, I think that some assistance weighing in with the Energy and Technology Committee it's not too late to submit testimony to that committee. And in fact, sometimes it's very helpful. I always go and take a look and see what everybody else is writing and what they're saying. And that often helps me shape my testimony, answer questions in advance, know what kind of questions are going to be asked and what other people are saying. And so I would strongly recommend on that piece of legislation, even though the hearing was today, they're going to have to go back, they being the committee and the members, and we have a lot of good champion legislators on that committee as well, that would help us fight to get that passed. And so they need to be persuading or be persuaded to push their leaders to bring that bill out for a vote. Because what happens is, just because you had the public hearing, just because it sounded good and a lot of people came out, doesn't mean you'll see it again. It could just simply die by the deadline that the committee has to get it moved, and that's the end of it. The second bill that I think, oh, by the way, that's Senate Bill 10, and it's the 100% zero electric grid by 2040. The second bill that we think is going to be probably the biggest game changer on climate and emissions is for Connecticut to adopt California's medium and heavy duty truck emission standards. That's HB 5039. That too was presented to lawmakers last year, and it made it through the Senate, I believe, but not the House. So it's got a lot of traction this year. It's one of the bigger bills that will have a significant impact on our emissions from trucks and buses and large heavy duty vehicles. So the way that works is that the states have the option to either take the federal standards or California standards. It's complicated, but we have already adopted California standards for our regular vehicles. And so what happens is when you adopt their standards, which are better, we find better than the federal standards, we have to change our standards when they change their standards. So we were already a part of that. That was a battle that took place a while back. Now we want to adopt California's emission standards for buses and trucks. And so part of their standards require 100% zero, electric, zero carbon, I guess we should say, zero emission buses and trucks by date certain. I think it's 2035. I'd have to go back and double check. It's in the law, but that means not just, imagine no more pollution coming out of trucks and buses by 2035. That's huge. So as usual, you're going to have pushback. Right now, the DEP is trying to get ahead of the game and doing a study that will determine whether or not this is something we want to do, so that when the bill, which has not come out yet for public hearing, when it does come out, we've got the data, we've got the study, it's ready to go, and we'll need everybody, all hands on deck, to testify in support of that. Submit your testimony in writing, do it in person, call your lawmakers, email your lawmakers, talk to people about it, write letters to the editor, meet with your lawmakers, ask them questions, watch the committee here. And there's all kinds of ways to sort of immerse into that. And hopefully we will be able to get that over the finish line this session. The third one, and I bring this one up because it's new. The issue is not new. The issue of solar power is not new. But this particular bill, also in the Energy and Technology Committee, is an effort to take some of the obstacles away from commercial rooftop solar. It's not the big solar siting, grid scale solar that we're talking about that has a lot of siting issues that need to be resolved. And it's not the residential rooftop. What it is there are really strict limits on what businesses and commercial entities like parking lots and can put, how much solar they can put on their roof, how much they can generate, and it's capped. And by all accounts, that, for example, there's this perfect picture that shows a gigantic open roof that has a tiny little portion of solar on it, whereas the entire roof should be covered, and that you know, that electricity deployed, it would save money for the businesses, save money for others. And we're trying to get that legislation to be added to an existing bill that just came out. It's SB 176, so Senate Bill 176. And that is in the Energy Technology Committee that was originally intended to help expand community solar, which is a really important issue. So community solar is where you have like a facility of solar power that's shared by that local community. So if you're a renter, you don't have room on your roof or whatever, and you still want to have access to clean electric energy as part of the grid, that this is the bill that will help expand that. There have been some pilot projects. It needs to be expanded. So it's called Shared Community Solar. We're trying, because it's a solar bill, to get the commercial solar, rooftop solar added to that legislation so that we can get a bigger, more expansive bill out of the Energy and Technology Committee. There are two other very important proposals that I would have teed up first tonight, but neither of them are out yet. The verdict is still out whether we can get them moved or not. One of them is requiring climate education in public schools. And some of you may have heard about that. Some of you may have been working on it. I know Letitia has been really active on that issue. A lot of our youth and Sunrise are really pushing hard to get that passed. We need to, I'm sorry, and I can see I need to move this along. Okay, good, thank you for that. Okay, so what can you do? And I'm sorry, and the second one, just heads up, the second one that is not out yet, that's still in negotiations, there's a lot of back and forth. It is an environmental justice law, and it's a law that would, at the core of it, it would prevent additional polluting facilities from being placed in overburdened communities that already have many different polluting facilities where they tend to get dumped. This would try to prevent that and allow for more community input and ability to ensure that they did not have additional facilities in their community. So what can you do? Well, right now, the session's open. The committees are meeting, the bills are being raised, and the public hearings have started. So right now, what's important is to kind of get tapped into what the key issues are, just kind of read up a little bit on them. And if you're not already tapped into an organization that is active on certain policy, you need to do that so that you can get alerted in time, that you can get action alerts, that you can respond in a timely way. And just heads up, when you get an action alert, you don't have time to learn everything about it if it's new to you. So getting familiar with some of these key issues would, just so you can be more comfortable and understand how the process works and where you can weigh in. There is on our website at ctlcv.org, we have posted today our watch list, which will give you the list of all the legislation that we're tracking that's been raised so far, and some that we're hoping to raise. It'll give you the position, it'll give you the committee that it's in. That's ctlcv.org. We also have sample testimony that every time we put testimony, we put it up on our website in one place. So if you're looking to put testimony, for example, on the 100% bill, you can look at our testimony, or you can look at the testimonies that are online at the state website for the Connecticut General Assembly. So those are two important resources that you should be aware of, and we can share more information about how to use them. But everything you need to know about when the committees meet, when the public hearings are, what the status of the bills are, how to sign up for to testify in person, how to submit by email, testify in person by Zoom, how to submit emails to make them part of the public record, how to contact your lawmakers. It's just a wealth of official information. It's a little cryptic, so sometimes it's helpful. I'm happy to walk people through that, and Terry Eichel knows well how to help people navigate through that. But also for our, the League is one group, but there are other groups that regularly will send you alerts and action items and things to do. So make sure you tap into the groups that are doing that, so you get alerted in time to make your voice heard when it's most needed. And you do not need to be an expert, believe me. It's just important that you just get familiar a little bit with the issues, a little bit. But the most important thing you can do is personally contact lawmakers. That is the most impactful thing you can do. All of the other ways are important, and you should do them and track them. And it's not just one and done when you want an issue. You have to continually contact lawmakers, email them, let them see you, let them hear it, invite them to your community meetings, write letters about them when they do good things, put something to the letter to the editor, getting their attention, making them know that you are there and you're not going away, and in a positive way. And so there's all kinds of other ways that I can talk about this, but I think my time is going to be up. So I'm sorry, there was many more things that I wanted to touch on. One other quick thing I'll say, and Terry, then I'll stop. One other quick way to make sure that you are in front of lawmakers and getting their attention is outside of the legislative session. This is an election year. And there's nothing that they care more deeply about than knowing that their constituent like them and will vote for them. And if you are able in any way, and you like your lawmaker, if you're able in any way to help their campaign, volunteer, help them reach their public financing, that is a terrific way to sort of develop a relationship for the long term. So, and lobby days are coming up too. So there's plenty of work to do on virtual lobby days as well as public hearings. But anyway, I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Lori. Wow, that was a lot of great information. And I'm excited to go into just a really quick Q&A. So the first question I have is that someone asked, Leah asked, she said their legislators are more willing to listen if there are lots of people in their town calling or writing them. Mm-hmm. And she wondered if any of the groups, I think, and specifically your group, has telephone trees or email trees, I think related to like towns or districts.
Yes, what we do is, and there are several groups that use different techniques to get people, but we use what's called, it's Every Action, and we'll send an alert out and we'll say, here's the issue, here's what you need to use, the basics, contact your lawmaker, and you can click through and it will automatically put you to your lawmaker. So you can email a customized message to them. Or you can just use one of the messages that we've sort of pre-texted, but it's always better to do anything that's unique, that says you're a constituent and you care about something. It doesn't take too many of those to get a lawmaker's attention. When they get hit from all places outside of their district, that's less impactful, but it is still, particularly if there's a leader of a committee that's an important, decider of an issue you care about, it's okay to contact people who are not your lawmaker, but start with your lawmaker, and you can contact them directly through an action alert from the league. And I know other groups do it different ways, and we can do it by district. We can do it. There's different ways to do it. We can even direct you to the governor or.
Sure. Thank you. So someone had asked about the caps on residential solar, which Leticia answered in the chat, but I just wanted to clarify, there are also caps on residential solar. And is that being addressed at all in legislation, or if the focus is just the commercial? Leticia is nodding her head and exactly. Okay, so how much emphasis is being directed towards public education about energy conservation and energy efficiency? I mean, I know we're obviously trying to move towards, this is a paraphrase of Bill's question, but we're trying to move towards renewable, clean sources of energy and whatnot, but how much are we, where is the state on energy efficiency and conservation?
Well, that's clearly, that's Leticia's, wheelhouse. She's been the one who's been really focusing and getting people to pay attention to energy efficiency programs. Yes, that is always the most inexpensive electricity you can have, right? It doesn't cost anything. It's the low-hanging fruit. It's the thing that they should be doing first. But unfortunately, a lot of the mindset is usually about, okay, generation of clean energy. And, we've made good strides in that. I mean, we have been a leader on offshore wind. We've got to do a lot more solar. But again, the buildings, like there's legislation I didn't mention in this because I figured Letitia would probably talk about it, but there's a couple of bills this year dealing specifically with energy efficiency and building
Oh, great. Okay.
building codes and things, right? I'm not as versed in it.
I will definitely bring that question back to Letitia during her Q&A then. Excellent. Sabina wanted to know, what is the logic that legislators use to substantiate or defend limiting solar?
Well, if we're talking about sort of net metering, like if you're talking about the costs of clean energy are very competitive with regular energy. I say regular, fossil fuel, otherwise. It's the distribution of it and the infrastructure that makes the renewables, that why they're always saying, renewables are so much more expensive, and it's raising our, the cost of all ratepayers, and that's just not true. I mean, yes, it's why you're paying more for that is because the infrastructure costs. But the other thing is there is something to be said for, if all of your energy is being produced and you're still using the infrastructure and your energy is all being produced at home and you're not paying for any of that, they're saying that those are like stranded costs that they have to cover that then get spread out over everybody else who pays for the infrastructure. But there are all kinds of, there's a whole report out that you might have seen that lists the 5 or 6 major objections that you will hear consistently against every single pro-climate bill. No, it should be volunteer. No, it costs too much. No, let's not get ahead of the other states. No, we're already leading on that. We don't need to do more. They're systematically, you will see those in the objections, whether it's solar, whether it's anything. Our
So
utilities.
who puts that out?
Who puts that, the report or the?
Yeah, that 8 common arguments. Who?
Well, any entity that has benefit in the status quo of fossil fuels.
No. I meant like you. I think you. I thought, or at least what I thought was there was an actual report that listed the sort of 8.
Oh yeah, there is.
Who prints that?
I think it was Brown. Was it Yale Brown? Anyway, I have it, and that's something I can definitely. It was really interesting because it was a report that was indicating why aren't our climate bills going forward? What's going on? And there was a study done that showed in Connecticut specifically how much money from the utilities and the fossil fuel industry and others was being expended, millions and millions and millions to stop, to lobby against our bills. And also they did sort of an assessment of what the major sort of testimony for, testimony against, and what the major arguments were. And it was really validating because we just rip our hair out every time they say, well, let's not get ahead, the same thing. And we've been seeing them, and to see it actually validated in a report. Yeah, this is what they're doing. And I'll just say one more thing about that is that our opponents are going more and more sort of underground, in the sense that you're seeing them less and less submitting testimony and showing their hand, and more they're putting more money into the lobbying behind the scenes and developing those, using their relationships to kill things. That's why it's so important that we counter that with as much public spotlight, shine the light on what you want that's good, that's a positive solution. And, there's nothing like, sunshine is the best disinfectant. And getting some light that this report put on that problem, I think, is something that we've been sharing with lawmakers, pointing to these arguments, saying, are you hearing these also? And this is what you have to say if you get that argument. So it helps us. It helps us form our messaging and know what we're up against.
Thank you. So I'm going to do one more question before we go over to Leticia. Uh, how does, hang on a second, how do people get on, Leah wants to know, how do you get on the list of actions? Hang on a second, my computer is unplugged.
Well, I can answer that real quick. I mean, there's different groups that do it, but absolutely. If you go to ctlcv.org, you just go to action alerts and sign up, just put your email, and you'll start getting, we don't inundate you. We don't sell your list or anything like that. We just send, in fact, we'd send more if we had resources to send more, but we will send you notices when it's time to submit testimony, when a certain action takes place, when a vote is coming up. Those are the kinds of things. And then in general about some of the issues and update you on different things happening on climate and other environmental issues. So just go to ctlcv.org and just sign up. And while you're there, look at the watch list, look at some of the testimony, just get familiar. We do also put all of our, it's election season, so pretty soon we'll be putting up all of the information on candidates running for office that we've endorsed and in their positions and things like that to set us up for the coming session.
Great. Thank you so much, Lori. All right, I am now going to share my screen and go to our next presenter. There we go. Wonderful. So I'm very, oh, nope. There we go. I'm very excited to welcome Leticia Colon de Mejias with us. She is the founder and CEO of Energy Efficiency Solutions, a Connecticut-based full energy conservation company. EES offers comprehensive solutions to conserving energy, including home energy assessments, energy usage reports, air sealing, insulation, windows, solar, heating and cooling systems, renewable energy options, energy education, and return on investment coaching for retrofits and energy upgrades. They are #1 in the nation for customer service and market leadership. Since inception, EES has remained in the top 1% of Connecticut-based home energy solutions vendors, leading the way in MMBTU energy reduction statewide. In August of 2013, the two Connecticut-based utility companies nominated EES for the 2013 DOE National Award in 4 out of 4 categories. EES was the recipient of the National Department of Energy Award in Market Leadership and Customer Relations for the United States of America Home Performance with Energy Star program. In 2007, she co-founded Green Eco Warriors, a nonprofit youth ecology and conservation group located in Windsor, Connecticut, of which she is president. She is also a member of the National Environmental Justice Advisory Council and a published author of many children's books. Her bio is quite extensive, and I'm very, very excited to welcome Leticia to our webinar. Leticia, you are muted.
I was trying to unmute. And no matter how many times I do these things, I feel like
Right.
whenever you're on camera, everything that can go wrong goes wrong. Thank you so much for having me here, and what a pleasure to follow Lori. I learned so much about advocating and policy activism from Lori Brown and her organization, and I advise everyone to definitely sign up for those alerts from her group, because you can 100% learn a lot about how to advocate effectively from their work. I'm going to share my screen and God willing, it will work. And there it is. That makes me excited. And now I'm going to go to this version so people can see it. Great. All right. So I'm here to talk about really advocating for a clean energy future. And I really wanted to, I do this a lot. It's my job, right, to talk to people. But each time I do it, I always want to try to be encouraging to others. And as I was preparing for this specific talk, I thought to myself a couple of things. One is 10 minutes is just not enough time to share all the information that I know. So what would be the most important thing for me to tell you? I think in order to create a clean energy transition, that it is critical that we help people understand. I feel that creating people who care about people on the planet requires sharing of information. Education is essential to motivating long-term behavioral changes. In fact, I've yet to find anyone who's been successful in motivating people without using either positive reinforcement in education or fear. Fear seems to have not worked so far, so I'm thinking we should move in the direction of helping people understand the interconnectedness to the planet that sustains our very lives. Before I knew about climate change or the pollution's impact on my family, I really didn't have a reason to care about climate change. And thus I wasn't involved in policy and I wasn't involved in energy. In fact, I worked in healthcare. But after I learned about those things, I suddenly realized that they mattered because what we believe defines our decisions. That's even true for lawmakers. Our policymaking is based on what they hear and what they know. And oftentimes they're being actually informed by lobbyists. And lobbyists, they're there for a reason. They're being paid to participate and to provide information. So they may not be providing the information that's important to you or me, or even to our future here on planet Earth. In order to transition to a safer future, we have to think in different terms as humans. This is not about red versus blue. In fact, this is about red, white, blue, you, and me. It's about all of us. So today we use more energy than ever in the history of mankind. In fact, the energy usage that we use today is what's causing the climate crisis that we're experiencing now and will be experiencing until we resolve the problem. From morning until night, we use energy. In fact, the demand that we use as a society has never been stronger. We've never been more connected or dependent on electronics for our daily needs. And we've never had to make changes as rapidly as we need to make them now. And unfortunately, often people get scared by changes and thus they dislike them because, again, they don't understand them. On average, humans, we use about 10 kilowatts of electricity per day. This produces a lot of carbon dioxide. And the way we use energy is for heating our food, cooking our food, keeping our climate under control in our homes, warm in the winter, cool in the summer. And as our climate actually intensifies and becomes hotter, we're going to have more demands for energy, not less, because we actually will have to add more cooling elements to our homes to keep our children and our elderly and our disabled safe from climate crisis, in fact. And although we use all this energy, we're very rarely thinking about where it comes from. In fact, 33% of our energy usage in Connecticut is actually residential energy usage. But until really last year, we didn't talk much about buildings and energy usage. We weren't really talking about that energy demand or energy efficiency. And we really haven't focused in on expanding those things that Lori mentioned earlier, like shared solar, which would allow renters access or low-income households access to solar, for example. And we have allowed our legislators in general and the Department of Energy and Environmental Protections, in fact, to not expand access to residential solar or shared solar. And we have had caps on things that would be meaningfully useful, like expanded demand reduction programs that would allow people in multifamily housing, single family housing, or renters to have equal access to things like insulation, better thermal boundaries, improved windows, or heat pumps and electrification. So it's really critical to, in my opinion, rather, that we understand where our energy comes from, what the demands are, because then we can create ways to have solutions for those issues. Our energy burdens are often talked about in relationship to transportation, and transportation is also a large emitter and a large portion of our energy demand. Here it's represented at Connecticut's level of 31%. This is energy usage by end sector. The next slide I'm going to show you is carbon emissions by sector. I'm bringing this slide forward because, again, until very recently, the state of Connecticut didn't look at energy emissions from residential or buildings very often. But when you look at this piece of information out of the Governor's Council on Climate Change from 2017 is this one, it shows here that buildings, in fact, are 31% of carbon emissions overall. So buildings are a big part of carbon emissions, right alongside of transportation. And we have to remember that right now, transportation is not generated very much by electrical generation, but electricity in Connecticut is unfortunately coming from fossil fuels. So as we electrify our heating and cooling through heat pumps, or even our cooking top ranges, if we don't also look at our supply or our generation and what we're using to create that energy, then we'll just be polluting elsewhere, which isn't very good at all. There's still a general disconnect in the population about where our energy comes from and the importance of efficiency or even behavioral changes, because so often we're just wasting 10 to 15% of our overall demand, not just in Connecticut, but nationally, by not paying attention to our chargers that are plugged in, our phones, our computers, our lights that are on when we leave the room. And not just at home, but when we look at this at a commercial level, at the state level, and I always think about the DMV, because when I go in there, I look at all those lights that are on and all those inefficient windows, and I think, oh my, what a waste of our tax dollars and our energy, and how much carbon emissions are coming from our state buildings. Many communities are still not aware of the benefits of efficiency or conservation, and this is because we really have no state-supported campaign or educational outreach that would change that and get other people involved and bring them to the table so they could meaningfully engage in creating our energy transition. Where does our energy come from anyways? Very little has changed in the world of electric generation. And unless you work in the industry like myself, you're probably not thinking about that at all. We keep creating new ways to use energy, but we spend so little time thinking about new ways to generate it or how to protect ourselves from the harms of the way that we use energy. In Connecticut, unfortunately, almost 95% of our energy usage is fossil fuel based. And by the way, folks, nuclear, it comes from uranium, and you still have to dig, drill, and blow things up to get uranium. And when you create nuclear energy, that nuclear waste is actually still left behind. So it could hurt people. And unfortunately, in environmental justice communities, it is hurting people. Oftentimes, we ship our dirty stuff elsewhere, harming those environmental justice communities that Lori was just talking about. More importantly, Connecticut has one of the highest asthma rates around. And that is very much actually related to the fact that we generate a ton of electricity here with dirty fuels that we actually send elsewhere. And ISO New England reports, which I find fascinating, will show that we don't need, for example, a new gas plant at Killingly or anywhere in Connecticut, because actually our demand reduction plans are so good that we use the least energy per person in our state anywhere in the nation. But what we don't do is pay attention to where we send the energy that we generate. And electric generation is not the same as supply. So I was not saying it was procurement rather. So oftentimes our executive orders, like the governor's one that just came out, is about procurement or what we purchase, not what we generate. But what will hurt our lungs is what we're generating in the state of Connecticut. So the more we learn about our energy systems, the better we are as advocates. And that's why I think education is so critical. How can one be involved in something that they don't know exists? Empowerment through knowledge is key to engagement. And the future of our state's energy plans should require that we make deep connections to those communities who have been historically left behind, like renters, low-income communities, and communities of color. We should also acknowledge the people that are doing the work in the effort to a clean energy transition. Should we make efforts to ensure that we reach out and meaningfully engage people in participation? Is it equity-based if we don't make space at the table? And should we consider our impacts and choices as advocates when we're advocating for those that we might not be speaking to? The Governor's Council on Climate Change, in my opinion, did a good job this past time on equity. And I have put a link at the end of this presentation to a video about equity and what it really means in an energy transition. For example, should we consider the groups who are struggling with basic needs, or maybe in low-lying communities that will flood first? Should we worry about safe shelter or work that would allow them to have safe shelter, or clean air and water and good health, a chance to sustain their families through climate change? Or should we worry about personal EVs before shelter that's safe? Learning about people and their needs will help us in our work for an equity-based transition. We should not assume that we know what people's needs are unless we take the time to listen to them and learn and allow space for them at the table to meaningfully participate in our work. The nation as a whole is facing a lack of qualified workers, and this is because we have not taken the time to provide science-based education in our schools here in Connecticut or across the nation. But a lack of workers that are qualified to either install solar, heat pumps, or any other type of meaningful clean energy is going to be a problem if we don't empower them with information so they can accept these careers and participate in our transition. And I have a timer on, Terry, and I'm almost done. Historically, minorities have been underengaged in these careers. In fact, Black Americans only represent 12% of the workforce of the nation, but in Connecticut, they only represent 6%. And nationally, Latinos represented 16%, while in Connecticut, we only represented 11% of the workforce in energy and clean energy careers. To reach inclusion and equity levels, we must close that gap by providing information and education that is equitable in those communities who don't even have access to basic science. Methods of engaging them exist, which is really awesome because all we would have to do is implement them. But I won't be able to do that alone, which is why I'm here to talk to you tonight about the importance of engaging those communities in science-based information so they can actively find careers like mine or the 27 people of color that work for me. More importantly, there are opportunities to directly influence this right now through our policy activism. In fact, there are all types of legislative pieces that are moving, but the one that isn't moving is equal access to climate change education that meets next generation science standards, which is part of our federal guideline on climate education, by the way. We should also be talking to our students about civics, economics, because when we pull one string, it certainly affects another. And I think the pandemic has done a great job of displaying the huge disparity gap between the have and the have-nots in the state of Connecticut. That said, we can have our cake and eat it too. An example of that is this workforce development program that just happened in Connecticut that helped 15 people find jobs, and they are still gainfully employed 6 months later, helping this clean energy transition occur right now. These folks are looking forward to making generational wealth, and they've enjoyed seeing people like themselves teaching these classes. They have more confidence to have these jobs, and they're connecting to things like solar. There are people who worked for me in 2010 learning about efficiency who now are the top salespeople in the nation for companies like Trinity Solar that specifically focus on low-income communities across the nation. In closing, power needs to be shared because equity requires us to bring those people who've been left behind to the table and allow them to meaningfully engage in this effort that will impact us all. So I'm going to move right to the last slide here because I want to be sure that when this is sent out later, you take the time to look at meaningfully supporting next generation science standards and equal access to climate change information in our schools and our communities, which would empower people like these here to be at the table right alongside you and me and have the chance to change the world together. Additionally, at the end of this presentation will be the link to the GC3 PowerPoint, which explains the concept of equity in a clean energy transition, and a video that goes alongside of it. And I've also have a link in here to the GC3 environmental justice final report that came out this year as well. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that I can allow Terry to ask questions.
Thank you so much. Wow, I'm so excited that your presentation will be available because there's a lot of information in there that people are really going to be able to dig into. And the question that I really have for you is, with the climate education bill legislation that really got raised for a couple of years in a row, and I guess it's, as Lori said, still in negotiation. What's your take on that? Do you think it will get raised this year? And how could legislation answer some of the concerns that you raised in terms of the different types of education you're looking for?
Sure. Great question. And ultimately, I'm not sure whether the bill would be raised. We were told that it would be raised. Christine Palm was really a great leader, in my opinion. She's worked very hard on this bill. She's been disrespected, unfortunately, when she's brought this bill forward. People have not really supported her in a way that would have been effective. She's, in my opinion, a champion for change. I've asked the Black and Puerto Rican Caucus to champion this bill. I think, honestly, the way to get this bill raised is what you're doing here tonight, Terry. I think that it requires people like Lori and other people at Save the Sound and that the Nature Conservancy group to understand that equity requires us to have the same opportunity to speak meaningfully on these issues. And how can we ever have that chance if we don't have access to any information? And people keep saying that Black and brown people are late adopters, but we're not late adopters. We're actually just underinformed and disengaged because of that lack of information. So if folks that are great enough to join sessions like this have the time and desire to help move that forward, the best thing to do, in my opinion, is to write your legislator a letter or an email. I would really suggest calling the Speaker of the House, Matt Ritter. I think we need to get a hold of the environmental chair. I think that Energy and Technology, Rep. Conti could use a few phone calls reminding him that in energy and technology, it's really important to not leave Black and brown people and vulnerable populations behind. And I think that this is really about the right to know. And like I said at the beginning, it's not red versus blue. This is about red, white, and blue. And I believe that teaching people how to use energy wisely and make informed decisions is actually a conservative approach to doing the right thing. It's empowering people to have agency, and that I don't see anyone who could deny that right to have agency and make informed decisions.
That's great. Thank you so much. Is there anyone else that has a question in the chat? I feel like great. I think what I want to do is, I know Mally has some eco-justice actions she wants to do, and so I wanted to get to that, and then we will probably have some time for a few more Q&A before the end. Does that sound good?
Sure. I just have one more thing that I think is
Oh, yeah,
critical.
please.
Regarding solar, which is up right now under the bill that Lori mentioned, and I wrote it down, SB 176. Ultimately, there's some issues here that I think are very broken. And this, again, goes back to equity. So we give $100 million every year to the Green Bank. It's just posted they've received $2 billion over time. How exciting. But I feel like some of that money should probably be geared towards expanding access for those who are disadvantaged, like giving them solar, for example, or expanding shared solar, or removing those caps to residential solar and to commercial solar, or to all solar. Because ultimately, if we would like a clean energy transition, then some of us are going to need a leg up. We're going to need a little help to reach those goals. And certainly others have had lots of legs up, like $2 billion worth. So I'm looking forward to seeing some of those investments shared with those communities who have been left behind. And I'm here for questions after. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leticia. And Diane just wanted to know what the bill number is for the environmental justice and I think the education bill. And Diane, I think the answer to that is because they haven't been raised yet, they don't have numbers.
Right.
Right. So once they're raised,
one more, I want to say something to that, to Diane, whoever you are. It's critical that people understand that they haven't been raised because no one's advocating for them except for me. Because unfortunately, there aren't many people of color at the table to advocate for themselves. So others are going to have to take up for that, much like how slavery was changed. It's time for others to stand up for the things that are right. And that's actually an equitable transition.
Thank you.
If people want to, if I could just add just quickly to that, that bill needs to be raised in the Education Committee. And that is where you would want to direct any letters, testimony, phone calls. There was some progress made quietly last session. We didn't even realize it had happened, tweaked the law a little bit, but it's a very simple fix. And if they were to bring it up, and it could actually be a part, as it has been, part of a larger bill. So there's usually a big omnibus like education bill that does all kinds of things. And that's how they tweaked it last time. So I just wanted to say that. But if it's the standalone and, you know, the Republican House filibustered that bill for 5 hours when Christine Palm was trying to get it passed a couple years ago. 5 hours twice. So that's the kind of the polarization we're seeing right now, even in Connecticut. It's never been quite that bad before.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well,
But
thank you.
they
Oh,
got
go ahead.
changes to the little but so I would say it's worth right now continually, you know, in a positive way, shoot emails to the chairs of the education committee. You can take a look on the CGA website and see, okay, who are the members on the committee. They've got their email links right there. You can email them and ask them. I mean, there's all the tools are right there. It just can be a little cryptic finding them.
Thank you. Thank you. Great. Thank you. Don't worry, we'll have time for a few more questions. I want to introduce Mally Cox Chapman, and I'm going to share my screen again. Mally is an advisor to family foundations. Her work, both national and international, focused on creating impact with nonprofits and joy for donors. She is the author of 3 books, most recently including The Case for Heaven. She is also the co-founder of an initiative in Connecticut called SOS Save Our State that is helping environmental nonprofits and justice groups to speak with one voice on climate change. Sorry. Mally, go ahead.
Okay, well, we're going to switch tone here and topic. For one thing, from 2 passionate professionals who are enormously good at what they do and enormously knowledgeable about what they do, to a mere citizen working with some other citizens, figuring out how could we act as teams to create change in our state. And it can be as an individual, it can be as a green team or an entire congregation. When we started preparing this webinar, we knew that we wanted to urge you all to contact your legislators about the climate change bills that had the most chance of passing. But we also heard from a lot of you that you wanted ideas on how you yourselves could act for eco-justice. We will suggest 2 actions. I will outline them, and then we will take a poll, which is really cool, to see if you would like a follow-up webinar that will give you more granular detail on how to do the work. The first action is to advocate for electric school buses in your community. Millions of dollars are available for electric buses through the Volkswagen settlement and federal monies. Just to remind you, New Haven is counted as the city with the 2nd worst air pollution nationally. We have to do our part, and who better to do it for than our children? The first action, here's how the action will work. The decision makers about school buses are school boards. After a webinar that gives you a toolkit on how to approach them, you will ask your local school board to ask their transportation provider to apply for a bus grant. Can you hear me? All right. I'm getting some feedback, but maybe not. We will make available tips on how the school board needs to approach their bus provider and how to help the providers apply for the grant. A seasoned pro will also be available to guide you. To give you hope, a Connecticut nonprofit recently guided 24 towns through the process that released $12 million for 43 electric school buses and the infrastructure they require. But we need more. By one estimate, 2,000 older diesel buses are candidates for replacement. Just think of the impact we can have if a groundswell of faith-based communities all over the state took over this work. Here's the second action step, and it goes absolutely to what Leticia was talking about. Over 30% of all fossil fuel emissions in our state come from residential buildings. We encourage you to make use of energy audits to solve this problem. Only 30% of all homes in Connecticut have had audits. Again, there is a bucket of money available for this work, and many well-regarded companies and nonprofits, such as Leticia's, to do the audits at a very low cost. but most people don't know about them, and possibly under-resourced people most of all. Guess why? There's been no concerted outreach, no campaign to let people know what resources are available. The utility companies have been deputized by the legislature to do outreach, and guess what? They're going slow. So we need outreach champions to speed up the pace of work. Here's how it would go. After you get an audit of your own house done and find out how much money you are going to save from their recommendations, you will be ready to do outreach for your neighbors. With your own audit as an example, and with our toolkit on how to do outreach, you will be able to speak with knowledge and enthusiasm at community gatherings, farmers markets, town celebrations, your own coffee hour, to sign up right on their phones, people who do not know that for free or $50, depending on their income level, they can upgrade the energy efficiency of their home. Lower and middle income people qualify to have a technician certified by the Building Performance Institute to come to their home and make energy saving improvements to reduce drafts, help on lighting, and their hot water bills. This important resource is now even available for renters. When all of us, the affluent as well as low and middle income folks, cut their utility bills, our climate will benefit. So those are the action steps we are proposing. Be a climate champion, calling for EV school buses, or be a climate advocate doing outreach for more energy efficient homes, or both. We called for this webinar because there is a lot we can do as faith-based communities. No matter what our denomination, we all believe in justice and believe in taking care of creation. So many of us have felt helpless for so long. Now there's no need for helpless. You can make a big difference in your community and in our state to lower our fossil fuel emissions. So will you choose one? Maybe you'll choose both. Let the polling begin. The
Right.
way it's going to work is that we're going to be looking at the poll in real time, and you will be with us. And if you want, we will then provide a webinar to help you with the tactics and the toolkits for each of the action steps. So
All right,
that's what you're polling for.
I'm going to now launch this poll, and I hope that it works. Can you see it? All right. Oh,
Yep.
People are voting. That's very exciting. Look at that.
Oh, can't we do both?
I don't. Oh, maybe not. I
No.
guess it's a single choice.
Hmm.
Oh, so people are interesting.
Hmm.
Right, get your votes in there, folks. I think I'll let it go to. I'm gonna let it go to 1 minute. We've got 12 seconds left. All right, and I'm very. We really wanted these to be eco-justice actions. We're hoping that this is something that. Okay, I'm going to end the poll now and share the results. Can you see that?
Yeah.
All right. So honestly, is very there's a preference for the electric school bus, but energy efficiency is always a solid way to go. The weatherization programs are excellent in this state, and I agree. More outreach is just needed, especially with renters and landlords. IREJN is looking at how we can sort of support that work with renters and landlords, because that's often a barrier to energy efficiency measures. Electric school buses are important, and I as you know, through IREJN, we're very committed to justice. I mean, Interreligious Eco Justice Network. we're justices in our names. And so we really try to look at everything that we do from a justice lens and an equity lens. So thank you so much. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up shorter, say 45-minute to 60-minute webinars to go on each of these topics and how people can participate. And so even if you selected one, you're certainly going to be welcome to attend both. And we'll make them, they'll be a little bit shorter, and but hopefully we'll be able to really get some great traction on that. So we've got about 9 more minutes. And I wanted to open it back up for Q&A for anyone. Mally, Lori, Leticia, for any questions. Let me just see here what we've got. Some folks. So Bill said, can someone explain a little bit more about statewide mandates to educate K through 12 about energy conservation in the classroom? Do these programs exist already? And if they do, are expanded programs proposed?
No, they don't exist.
They do
There's
not.
no requirement. There are a few towns that offer climate education at the high school level. Fairfield is one. Loomis Chaffee, which is a private school, is another. Mostly they're provided at private schools currently, meaning that most of the children who attend public schools don't have access. And no, there's no plan to do them unless we get legislation to create that opening and opportunity.
So Andrea was wondering about buses that sit idling to make, do we have a no idling law in Connecticut?
There are some, like I really had thought that they had passed that no idling, because they'll pull up in front of the Capitol and leave the buses like spewing. I mean, when they're not supposed to, but the argument is that, when it's cold, they need to keep the buses warm, even when there's no one in them, because when they come back. So anyway, they tried again. Will Haskell tried to put a bill forward again last session that would have, strengthened, I guess, what may already be on the books, but, fines and things like that. So I think even the law that we have isn't being enforced.
Right.
That's correct.
That won't be a problem with electric school buses.
Right.
I would say one thing about the climate education bill, because you asked, the question was about the, energy efficiency programs, but the climate education bill, at least now it's required to be, to have a program developed to be offered. So it doesn't leave it just up to the teachers to piece together, right? If you don't have the time or resources to put together a climate program. So now it's going to be offered under the Next Gen Science Standards as something formulated already. And the next step is to mandate that be taught.
Right. Are you answering the question about each local school board? So Lynn said, isn't educational curriculum decided by each local school board?
No, the
I don't
state,
think so.
it's the state the state, Next Gen Science Standards are
Right.
state
Okay.
wide. And the first battle was just having it to be allowed to be taught. That was the first battle, just to allow it to be taught. And the second was the second tweak. I mean, this has been going on for about 5 years, right? 4 years. The second tweak was to have it offered as an elective, to require to be offered as elective. We almost got that, but it ended up just being, let's just have them formulate. And that was tucked in either to the budget implementer or one of the big education. Is that what it was? The implementer? So they can do stuff. They can do anything they want if they have the will to do it. So never give up just because you don't see something the way you think it is. There's always people back behind the scenes that can help make things happen if they want to.
And I will say, we had Catherine Hayhoe for a webinar last year, and she said 60% of the country's carbon emissions could be reduced, 60% reduced through energy efficiency measures. So that's just it's such an enormous amount, and it really is such an equity issue. I have talked with people in lower income, distressed municipalities is as how they're referred to. And I was talking with a renter who was paying $800 to $1,000 for heating. They didn't have any insulation in their house, but they were responsible for their electric heat. So the heat came on in the bedroom. There was no heat really in the downstairs. So when they were in their living room, their dining room, they were freezing. When they went upstairs, the bedroom was pumping out all this heat, but it was all rising and staying there. So it wasn't circulating through the house. And so they couldn't sleep at night because it was so hot in their bedroom, but freezing in their living room, kitchen, and dining room. And again, they were paying $800 to $1,000 every single month for electric heat. So, how could anyone possibly get ahead, financially when they have that type of energy inequity that they're dealing with? And we're also like that. Where's that electricity being generated? It's being generated at a fossil fuel power plant. So, sorry, I'm not a panelist. I'm supposed to be asking questions.
That was
That was an
awesome
excellent
input.
rant.
That was really phenomenal. I appreciate you letting people know what you know. The other thing is in the chat, I just dropped some information about the health implications of our energy demands and our lack of focus on efficiency and drawing down demands. Dr. Bazzi at Yale, I suggest, she just spoke recently at another conference I was part of. She has some incredible information about the health issues that are related to climate change and what's coming very rapidly. I would say that once you start reading Dr. Bazzi's information, it inspired me to work harder, do more, and try and reach more people with understanding that we could draw down. It's 50 to 60% just by doing simple efficiency things in our home and changing our behaviors. And it's actually very inexpensive. It's much less expensive than electric buses to do, and would have a broader implication in our state.
So for both of you, when are the next public hearings that people need to know about?
Tomorrow.
Okay. And
I'm
is
not
that
kidding. I just
I know,
spent
is that the Environment
yesterday-
Committee or Energy
Environment
Technology?
Committee. It's the first public hearing of the Environment Committee. Today was the first public hearing of the Energy and Technology. They're all on different schedules, but Monday, Wednesday, Fridays are the key committees to pay attention to. Planning and development, energy and technology, transportation. I don't know if that's Tuesday, Thursday, public health, and energy and technology. And there's also, but those are like the 4 or 5 ones that you really want to pay attention to. Most of the bills are obviously like 50% of them are coming out of Environment Committee, but there's more and more that are coming out of bad stuff that comes out of commerce, or planning and development is notoriously owned by the developers. I mean, it's, there's a lot of bad stuff that comes out of that. So tomorrow there is a huge slate of bills. This is going to be a long hearing day. I suggest everybody tune in and listen to it. What happens in the beginning is that you have, I don't know, you're coming at the end of time. The beginning, you'll have the agencies and the officials that spend the bulk of the hearing time. And that's where you learn a lot, because then you learn what the agencies are doing and what the administration's up to. And then the public is generally allowed to testify 3 minutes per, sign up. And then you'll hear, advocates, pro, con, in any number of the bills. So there's 6 or 7 that I submitted testimony on that are on our website. It just should be posted today. And they're also now posted on this, the state site. So if you just go to the homepage, cga.ct.gov, and you can start exploring around in that website, and just plug in, you'll just see committees, hit Environment Committee, you'll go to the Environment Committee page and you can see the agendas and you can see the lists. But there's a lot of bills coming up tomorrow. I mean, things that are not just climate. I mean, there's, pesticides, invasives, tree cutting, there's EPR. The EPR packaging is a huge climate related waste issue, because it's all about reducing, waste, which mostly is incinerated. So that is a big problem that this state has to deal with right now. So that's on the docket. It's got problems with it that needs to be fixed.
So
Yeah.
so when I'll send out a follow-up email to everyone who registered for this, and that will include links to the information that you're hearing about now, as well as I will include a link to find your legislator. I'll include a link to find, to track a bill, where you do that, how you see that, where the committees are. And then this particular webinar will be up on our YouTube channel, hopefully by tomorrow morning. Sometimes it takes you a while to digest a 90-minute webinar, but we will have all this information out for you. You can also sign up for IREJN's emails. I try to keep on top of things as much as possible too. So it's good to have your ear to the ground with all of these great groups. Leticia's group, Lori's group, everyone's just doing great work. And honestly, sometimes things happen really fast in the legislative session. And it's important, if you see action alert, take action now, open up that email and take that action right away. Because I remember in 2019, the plastic bag ban, on Friday night, it looked like a good bill. And then by the time it got introduced, they were working overnight. It was or over the weekend. It was the last weekend of the session. And on Sunday evening, they sort of snuck in language that completely sort of dismantled the bill. But every environmental group was on top of it. And Monday morning, everyone got their action alerts out and everyone opened up those emails and got the work done. And by the afternoon of Monday, new language had been introduced, voted on, and passed. So really what you do, how you contact people and getting in, it really makes a difference. So I will tell you, if I email you 3 times in a week with something to do, I'm not doing it for my health. I'm doing it because I know you want to make a difference and I'm trying to give you that information. So again, I want to thank all of our presenters for participating with us. I really want to thank Sabina and Mally for helping me put this together. They've done tremendous work. And Lori and Leticia, thank you so much for sharing all this information and for all your advocacy. I know this is the busiest time of the year for everyone. And I just want to say thank you to everyone. Everyone, have a terrific night.
Bravo.
Thank you.
You did a great job.
Appreciate it. Good night.
Good night.
All right, everyone, have a great night.